Before you continue, take a moment. Rest your hand on your chest, breathe slowly, and let yourself settle. What follows isn't just another piece of writing floating around online. It carries something genuine, something that might feel like it was crafted with you specifically in mind. If this found its way to you today, trust that there is a reason behind it. Certain truths only reach us once we are actually ready to receive them. There are moments in life when information feels different. The same words that may have meant nothing months ago suddenly land with a completely different weight. It is not always because the message itself has changed. Sometimes it is because we have changed. We have lived through certain experiences, carried certain emotions, and reached a place where we can finally understand something we were not ready to see before. Some lessons do not arrive when we are searching desperately for answers. They arrive when we have become quiet enough to recognize them. Maybe you have spent a long time trying to understand someone who felt impossible to understand. Maybe you have replayed conversations, analyzed silence, and searched for meaning in moments that left you confused. Maybe you have wondered why someone could seem so close one day and so distant the next. Why someone could make you feel deeply valued and then suddenly create a space that felt impossible to cross. That kind of uncertainty can be exhausting because the mind naturally wants a clear explanation. We want things to make sense. We want actions and feelings to match. We want to know that what we experienced was real. But some of the most difficult emotional experiences are not difficult because there were no feelings involved. They are difficult because feelings existed alongside fear, confusion, and emotional limitations. Sometimes a person can care and still struggle to express it. Sometimes a connection can be meaningful and still face challenges because both people carry their own histories, fears, and ways of protecting themselves. Understanding this can change the way you look at the past. Instead of only asking, "Why did they do this to me?" you may begin asking, "What was happening beneath the surface?" This shift does not mean ignoring your own pain. It does not mean accepting behavior that hurt you or convincing yourself that every difficult situation has a hidden romantic meaning. It simply allows you to see the full human picture. Every person carries experiences that shape how they love, how they communicate, and how they respond when emotions become intense. Some people move closer when they feel vulnerable. Others move away. Some people seek reassurance. Others seek distance. Some people express their feelings immediately. Others need time to understand what they are feeling themselves. The important thing is recognizing these patterns without losing yourself inside them. Because sometimes the greatest clarity comes when you stop trying to decode another person and start listening to what your own emotions have been telling you. Maybe you have been feeling tired from always trying to prove your value. Maybe you have been waiting for someone to finally choose you without realizing that you have already been choosing them again and again. Maybe you have been searching for answers outside yourself while ignoring the quiet wisdom within you. There is a powerful moment that happens when you begin seeing things differently. The relationship no longer becomes a puzzle you must solve. The person is no longer a mystery you must unlock. Instead, you begin recognizing patterns, understanding emotions, and making choices from a place of self-respect. That is when healing begins. Healing does not always mean forgetting someone. It does not always mean pretending you never cared. Sometimes healing means being able to remember a person without losing yourself in the memory. It means honoring what was real while also accepting what was missing. Some connections teach us through their presence. Others teach us through their absence. Both can leave something valuable behind. The truth is, every meaningful connection reveals something about us. It shows us what we desire, what we fear, what we tolerate, and what we need to grow. The people who enter our lives often become mirrors, reflecting parts of ourselves that we may not have noticed before. Maybe this moment is not about discovering whether someone else misses you. Maybe it is about discovering that you deserve a love where you do not have to constantly question your place. Maybe it is about realizing that your sensitivity is not a weakness, your desire for connection is not a flaw, and your need for emotional honesty is not asking for too much. The right understanding often arrives when we stop fighting reality and begin accepting it. You can appreciate someone's struggles without becoming responsible for fixing them. You can understand someone's fears without allowing those fears to control your life. You can care deeply for someone while still choosing yourself. That is the kind of truth that changes everything. Because the moment you truly understand your own worth, you stop chasing validation from someone who cannot consistently provide it. You stop measuring your importance by another person's ability to recognize it. You begin creating a life where love is not something you have to earn through patience, sacrifice, or endless understanding. And maybe that is why this message reached you at this moment. Not because it promises a perfect answer about another person, but because it invites you to see something deeper. The answers you have been searching for may not only be about why someone acted the way they did, they may also be about who you are becoming because of what you experienced. Some truths arrive quietly. They do not force their way into your life. They simply appear when you finally have the space to hear them, and when you are ready to receive them. They do not just change the way you see someone else. They change the way you see yourself. Here's what I want you to really sit with. Somewhere out there, someone has been thinking about you, not in a passing way, not now and then, but deeply and steadily. They've been holding your name close to their chest without ever saying it out loud. And something is beginning to shift. Whatever you believe governs the universe, life, fate, timing, it's rearranging things. This person is finding their way back toward you, and what they're bringing with them is going to catch you completely off guard. Pause here for a second before reading further. This isn't some random message that happened to land in your day. It arrived because something inside you was finally ready for it. Somewhere in your life, there's a person who went quiet. Maybe they pulled back. Maybe they acted like they'd already moved on, like you were simply a chapter they'd closed and set aside. But something has shifted in them recently, something quiet, but far from small. And they're coming back. Not for casual small talk, not to check in politely. They're coming because there's a truth living inside them that has grown too heavy to keep carrying alone. And when they finally speak it aloud, it's going to shake you. Now, let's talk about why this was always destined to happen. Certain connections simply refuse to follow the usual rules. Time doesn't dissolve them. Distance doesn't weaken them. Silence doesn't kill them. And chances are, you've already felt the ripple effects of this without fully understanding why. You've thought of this person out of nowhere for no clear reason. You've heard something that reminded you of them. You've woken from a dream with their face still lingering in your mind, or felt a wave of emotion you couldn't quite explain. None of that is random. When two people remain energetically tied to one another, those invisible threads make themselves known, even across months or years of complete silence. This person tried to sever those threads. They kept themselves busy. They told themselves they were over it. They convinced themselves they were fine. And during the daylight hours, they might have almost believed it. But late at night, once the noise faded and there was nothing left to distract them, you were still there. You kept resurfacing in their mind. And that kind of quiet, persistent ache eventually pushes someone to act. On the surface, they probably look like they have everything together. But underneath that composure, there's real conflict. They replay the moments you shared. They hear your voice echoing in their memory. They ask themselves why this feeling hasn't faded, why no one else has ever come close, why you, specifically, are still the one who lingers. And the answer frightens them, because it means you mattered far more than they ever let show. They're facing a hard truth now. They didn't lose you simply because things didn't work out. They lost you because they failed to show up the way they should have. And that kind of realization sits heavy on a person. You might be wondering why, if they've felt all of this, they stayed silent for so long. The answer is fear. Fear of how you'd react. Fear that you'd already moved on and were better off without them. Fear of rejection, of vulnerability, of having to face their own failures head-on and honestly. Staying quiet felt like the safer path. But silence always carries its own cost. Every day they didn't reach out, the weight grew heavier, the truth got louder, and eventually silence stopped feeling like protection and started feeling like a prison. Something happened recently that cracked all of this open for them. It might have been something small, something they saw or heard about you, a moment of loneliness that hit harder than usual, a quiet realization that life kept moving forward while everything unsaid just sat there, unresolved. Whatever it was, it broke through the wall they'd been hiding behind. And in that moment, they made a decision, not impulsively, not from some fleeting mood, but from somewhere real and deep inside them. They decided they had to speak, and when they do, it won't be some casual conversation. They aren't coming to catch up or smooth over awkwardness. They're coming to say the things they buried, the words that pride wouldn't let them speak before, the regrets they've been quietly carrying, the feelings they convinced themselves had faded. You thought they were unbothered. You thought they'd moved on without a backward glance. But the truth is nearly the opposite. They felt everything. They simply didn't know how to show it, or they were too afraid to even try. That truth, once it finally surfaces, is going to surprise you. What you're describing here isn't just a single moment. It's a threshold. It's the kind of moment that doesn't arrive with a bang, doesn't announce itself with certainty or clarity, but instead gathers slowly over time through silence, distance, reflection, and the slow, often uncomfortable process of becoming self-aware. By the time it finally takes shape, it carries real weight. Not just because of what's about to be said, but because of everything that's remained unspoken until now. They didn't arrive at this moment lightly. People tend to assume apologies come from impulse, from a sudden realization, from a wave of emotional overwhelm, but the kind of honesty you're describing, the kind that costs someone their pride, doesn't work that way. It builds slowly. It forms in private, in moments with no one to impress, nothing to defend, no narrative left to maintain, just them, alone with their own thoughts, gradually confronting the reality of what they lost and how they contributed to losing it. That's not an easy place to sit with, because admitting I was wrong in this context isn't just acknowledging a single mistake. It's dismantling an entire identity. It's letting go of the version of themselves that justified their actions, that shielded them from guilt, that told them they were doing their best, or that things simply weren't meant to work out. It's seeing clearly, without any distortion, that something meaningful had been placed in their life, and they failed to meet it the way they should have. That realization doesn't feel noble. It feels heavy. And yet, they stayed with it. They didn't run from it. They didn't bury it beneath distractions, new relationships, or convenient excuses. Or maybe they tried to at first. Maybe they told themselves they'd move on, that something else would eventually come along, that what you shared was good, but not necessarily rare or irreplaceable. Maybe they tried recreating that feeling somewhere else, searching for familiarity in someone new, trying to convince themselves connection could simply be swapped out for another. But that's exactly where the truth started surfacing, because comparison reveals a lot. When someone starts measuring everything that comes after against something that came before, it means that earlier experience set a standard, not in some superficial, this was better, that was worse way, but in a deeper, more meaningful sense. It means something about what you gave, how you showed up, how you cared, created an internal reference point they simply couldn't shake. And when nothing else measures up to it, the mind is forced to reconsider what it once brushed aside. That's exactly what honest time apart does. It strips away the immediacy of the moment. It clears out the emotional noise that so often clouds perception while two people are still entangled with each other. It creates space for patterns to become visible, for behavior to be reflected on honestly, for meaning to finally settle into place. It doesn't always lead back to reconciliation, but it very often leads to clarity. And clarity is exactly what brought them here. Not certainty, not expectation, just clarity. They don't know how you'll respond. They don't know if what they feel now will be enough to rebuild something that once broke. They don't know if you've moved on in ways that make this entire conversation feel too late. But they know one thing for certain, not saying it would have stayed with them forever. There's a particular kind of regret that doesn't fade with time. It doesn't soften. It doesn't get easier to carry. It lingers quietly in the background, persistently, because it was never resolved, because something real existed, and it was never fully acknowledged for what it was. They've decided they don't want to keep carrying that. And that decision to face you, to speak honestly, to risk rejection instead of hiding behind silence, that's genuinely significant. Not because it guarantees any particular outcome, but because it reflects a real shift in who they've become. The version of them that avoided, that didn't fully understand, that couldn't meet you where you were, that version couldn't have done this, couldn't have stood in front of you and said, without defense or excuse, I didn't know how to love you the way you deserved. That sentence alone tells you something inside them has genuinely changed. But here's where your role becomes just as important as theirs, because it would be easy, understandably easy, to interpret this moment purely through the lens of hope. To see their return as proof that what you felt was mutual all along, that the connection meant just as much to them as it did to you, that this marks the beginning of something being restored. And maybe it is, but maybe it isn't. That's exactly why awareness matters more than hope right now. Hope, when it isn't grounded in reality, has a way of pulling you back into old emotional patterns. It can make you overlook things that don't quite align, minimize what feels off, or rush toward resolution before the full truth has had a real chance to reveal itself. Awareness works the opposite way. Awareness lets you stay present, to listen not just to what they say, but to how they say it, to observe not just their words, but their energy, their consistency, their willingness to take real responsibility without deflecting or softening the truth. Because words, meaningful as they can be, are only the beginning. Anyone can articulate regret. Anyone can describe what they now understand. Anyone can say the right things in a moment, charged with emotion and vulnerability. What actually matters is what comes after. Do they show up differently after this conversation? Do their actions actually reflect the insight they're expressing? Do they demonstrate through consistency and real effort that they're capable of meeting you in a way they simply couldn't before? That's where the real answer lives. And you're in a position now to actually see that clearly, because you're not the same person you were when things fell apart. You've had your own process, your own stretch of time sitting with questions, with pain, with confusion, with the absence they left behind. You've had to make sense of things without any explanation from them. You've had to rebuild pieces of yourself that were affected by how everything ended. That changes a person. It sharpens your perception. It deepens your understanding of what you actually need, what you value, what you will and won't accept going forward. It grounds you in a way that simply wasn't possible before you went through all of it. So when this meeting finally happens, you won't be walking in from a place of longing. You'll be walking in from a place of knowing what it felt like to be with them, knowing what it felt like to lose them, knowing what it took to move through that loss and find your way back to yourself. That doesn't just vanish because they've returned. And that's exactly why this moment is as much about you as it is about them. Because while they're arriving to express something, you're there to evaluate something too, not in a guarded or defensive way, but in a clear, grounded way. You're there to see whether what they're offering now actually aligns with who you've become. That's a different kind of power, not power over them, but power within yourself, the kind that lets you stay steady even while something emotional is unfolding right in front of you, the kind that lets you listen fully without immediately reacting, the kind that lets you take in what's being said without losing your own sense of self in the process. And there will be a moment, standing in front of them, where everything goes very still. It might not last long, it might be subtle, but you'll feel it. Before your mind starts analyzing, before you begin forming a response, there will be a moment of recognition. Something inside you will register the reality of the situation, not the story you've told yourself about it, not the fears or hopes attached to it, but the actual presence of it. That's the moment worth trusting. Not your assumptions, not your expectations, but that quiet, internal awareness shaped by everything you've lived through. Because that awareness will tell you whether what's in front of you is genuinely aligned or not, and whatever it tells you, you're fully capable of responding to it. That's the part people so often overlook. They focus so heavily on the outcome, whether they'll get back together, whether things will work this time, whether the connection can be restored, that they forget the most important part of the moment is simply how they show up within it. You don't need every answer right away. You don't need to decide, in that single conversation, what the future looks like. You just need to be present enough to receive what's being offered and honest enough to respond from where you genuinely are. That might mean asking questions. It might mean expressing what you felt during the time apart. It might mean setting boundaries. It might mean saying you need time to think it over. It might mean recognizing that even though feeling still exists, something inside you has changed in a way that won't let you simply go back to how things were. All of those responses are completely valid because this was never about returning to the past. It's about deciding what, if anything, can actually exist in the present, and that decision doesn't need to be rushed. What matters is that it's genuine. Because that's ultimately what this whole moment centers around: truth. Not the version of the relationship that existed before, not some idealized version of what it could become, but the actual truth of what it was, what it is now, and what it could realistically become. And truth, when it's fully expressed, has a way of bringing peace regardless of the outcome. If there's still something worth rebuilding, it will become evident, not just through what's said, but through what's sustained over time. It will reveal itself through effort, through consistency, through a genuine willingness to do things differently. And if there isn't, that will become just as evident. Either way, something finally resolves. Something that once existed in a fog of uncertainty, something that left lingering questions, something that may have quietly surfaced in your quiet moments, finally comes into focus. It becomes fully seen, fully understood, fully felt. And once something reaches that level of completion, it stops holding the same power over you. It becomes part of your experience, part of your growth, part of your understanding, but it no longer occupies that unresolved space in your mind. That's where real peace comes from, not from securing a specific outcome, but from reaching a point where nothing feels unfinished anymore, where you're no longer wondering what could have been, no longer replaying old conversations in your head, no longer questioning whether something more should have been said or done. Everything simply becomes clear. And that's exactly why this moment, as emotionally significant as it is, isn't something to approach with fear. It's something to approach with presence. Let it exist without needing to define it immediately, because whatever it becomes will reveal itself in time. You don't have to force it into a particular shape. You don't have to decide in advance how it should unfold. You simply have to stay present enough to recognize it when it happens and trust yourself enough to respond honestly when it does. That's genuinely all this moment asks of you. Not certainty, not perfection, just presence and truth. Because in the end, that's what brings you back to yourself. And sometimes that's the real purpose hidden inside moments like this, not to bring someone else back into your life exactly as they once were, but to remind you of who you are now, to show you in a very real and tangible way just how much you've grown, to place you in a situation that once would have completely unsettled you and let you experience it from an entirely different place within yourself. That's not coincidence. That's alignment. And whether this leads to a new beginning or a final peaceful closing, one thing stays constant. You are no longer approaching love from a place of uncertainty. You are approaching it from a place of understanding.